Hey, welcome to my floor. The reason why we're down here today is because I wanted to talk about an issue with diagnostics concerning digital pianos, but this could also apply to a lot of other stuff. And it just has to do with the methodology of diagnosing stuff, but this may help some of you out there who are having issues with your digital piano. So the one thing that comes up all the time with digital pianos when they're not working, when you have certain keys that are making sound and other ones aren't, everybody always says the contacts underneath the keys. It could be worn, and it could be the conductive rubber pad, or it could be on the board itself. Those pads that connect to the traces could be worn and are in need of repair. Sometimes that can be the case. I have fixed several that was the case, but the thing to watch out for, and the thing that should sort of make you a little bit suspicious as to whether that's the case or not, is if the keys that aren't working appear in some sort of pattern on the keyboard. Now, what I mean by that is, or what you should do, is actually go through the keyboard and every single key, press it, see if there's sound, and see if it has velocity, that you can make a light sound with it or a louder sound with it. And all of the ones, just take a little piece of masking tape and stick it on any of the keys that aren't working. And if you notice that through the octaves that there's a particular note on every octave that's not working, or every second octave, in the case of this keyboard, the pattern repeated itself every second octave up to middle C, I think it was. And then it was fine after that. But it was several notes, I think 3 different notes, and like I said, they repeated every other octave. So what that tells me is, from having done this a bunch, is that most likely the issue is actually either in the wiring harness, the connectors, or something that runs after the touch pads that are underneath here going to the main board. Because when it happens in a pattern like that, you have to understand that there's individual traces going, but the individual traces actually account for multiple notes on the keyboard. And most keyboards are usually divided up into right and left. So there's 2 different headers. But first thing and easiest thing to check is your wiring and your connectors. And you can go through that whole procedure, and if all that seems fine and you want to do that with the keyboard on, powered up, and be able to wiggle stuff around, sometimes it's not good enough just to check for continuity. So what I'll do is I'll actually throw a picture up on the screen of what I found inside this one. And if you weren't looking for it, and this was the last thing that I checked on this, and if you weren't looking for it, you probably wouldn't see it, because the connectors, the headers, the backside where the pins are that I resoldered, those are all further up the keyboard, just past middle C on this one. So I had to strip all those keys out and take the key rail out in order to do it. So looking at the picture there, can you spot the problem? There's a dark section under the mask on one of the traces. Well, there's actually 2 spots, but there's one that looks sort of dark. So anytime you see something like that, grab your scraping tool and scrape that masking layer off of that trace to see what's going on underneath there, and so that you can test from a good point to your pin point, and test that for continuity and or resistance to see what's going on there. And when I scraped this one back, it was just like a fine powdery dust underneath. The trace had completely oxidized, and because the point in the circuit, I had posed this question on my one of my social media accounts, 4Amp Mechanic, and asked if anybody could spot the problem, and several people, I think, said that it was a short. Well, in this case, it wasn't actually a short, it was an open loop, and I had one question from a guy that said, is it possible that it was sort of melting, that it was overheating or something? And, well, no, that's not really possible on this section of board. I mean, it might be possible, but it's highly unlikely. There should not be high voltages or high currents running through. Basically, you're just pressing a key and connecting 2 things. It's a very low voltage part of the circuit. Not a whole lot going on there. So anyway, that had definitely oxidized, and if you see in the picture, actually 2 traces to the left, or the second trace to the left, there's another one there. That one was still actually conducting, but it was starting to oxidize. So I repaired that up, and basically it's just a matter of, you know, cleaning everything up really well, scraping it back while cleaning it up, and soldering some sort of jumper in there. Usually that's good enough where it's protected in underneath the keys, and then I seal it up with you know, like some sort of potting compound or liquid electrical tape, you know, something like that, to sort of protect it, because there's going to be a lot of junk that falls down through these keys and gets in there, so we don't want anything actually shorting out a signal. So the whole point here is that diagnostically, when you're going through stuff, not only that, you know, message boards, and there's a lot of information on the internet that is good, if you treat it in the right manner. I've said this time and time again, and I'll continue to say it. It's one thing to have that information, it's another thing to know what to do with that information. And you can't always just rely on what people are saying and take it at face value, because the import of that information can actually be something very different. And in this case, when you're dealing with certain keys that aren't actuating, of course, it's very possible it could be those contactors. But when you see that a pattern emerges in those keys, wait a second, there's got to be something else going on here. There's got to be a reason why in that pattern those keys are acting up like that. And I've seen everything from, you know, chewed up wiring harnesses where mice have gotten in. I've seen bad connectors on things. This is probably one of the first time, well, maybe the second time actually, I've seen bad traces on a board underneath for the key actuators. And, you know, all sorts of different things, but you got to add up all these little clues and they'll sort of lead you in the right direction. So, you know, if you're out there and you're trying to diagnose your own keyboard, you don't have access to a qualified repair technician, or you think it's going to cost too much, you got to be willing to go through the steps. You've got to be patient. It took me quite a while to, you know, search out this issue to sort of figure it out, because partially just because I don't work on a lot of pianos, so sometimes it takes me a little bit to work through everything. And you know, first thing I checked were the keypads, make sure there's no dirt or hair or anything like that holding the keys up off, and then I sort of clued in that there was a pattern that had happened in the keys that were dead. So I just thought this was something that was maybe a little bit important to share with you guys, because I run into this a lot. If you can identify some type of pattern, oftentimes that might help lead you towards a solution. So anyway, I hope this helps some of you out there. We'll see you in the next one.